La Fuente is one of those organizations that perhaps doesn't have a home within the worker justice world, perhaps doesn't have a home within the social service delivery world, doesn't definitely have a home within the PAC and the political, lobbying firm worlds, and it really doesn't have a home when we're only, when we're talking about just immigrant communities or just Latino communities. It's one of these organizations that grew out of 9/11 and the impact that immigrant communities were going to essentially have on what came out of 9/11, the workers that died and the families that they had and the workers that were displaced at that time. And this was over a decade ago, where both community and labor came together and understood that there was a need to fight for issues that impacted immigrant communities and that immigrants were not foreign to labor. And yet we, or the labor movement, had never really talked about the differences and the difficulties when crisis hits and when crisis doesn't hit, that immigrant communities have in the homes that they live in, outside from being just quote unquote workers. They were community members. They had homes, they had families, they had friends, and any kind of crisis or any kind of legislation impacted not only them as workers, but the places they put their heads down to rest at night. And so when La Fuente was started, it started as the New York Civic Participation Project in a borough in Upper Manhattan. It was in Upper Manhattan in Washington Heights, lively old Washington Heights. And, it's grown since then to be in neighborhoods like in the South Bronx, Jackson Heights, Corona, Queens, Hempstead, Long Island. We've gradually been doing more work across all of Nassau County and Long Island. Just met with a group of workers out in Bay Ridge and Benson and near Bensonhurst. We've just expanded earlier this year into New Jersey, and I am a Jerseyite. I live in Union City, New Jersey, so while I was working for Governor Patterson, I had to sustain through a Saturday Night Live episode where he called Jersey stinky, and it was extremely daunting to know that my boss was thinking that way. And yet, for some way, shape, or form, I found a home at La Fuente. And intensely, as I might feel about immigration reform in 2013 and the conviction that I said that we have to pass it in December without knowing that we would have a gang that we'd be proud of, a gang of 8 that would put forth legislation in the Senate. But, in December, when I told our group of members at our holiday gathering that I committed to knocking over 2,000 doors for them, with them, throughout New York City, throughout Long Island specifically, to target Peter King and the Congressman King, to talk about the importance of immigration reform because of his beautifully newly drawn districts that so many of my members had a say in when the redistricting process took place. I think that I realized what home I was in and what a great place La Fuente was to do things a little differently, to spark up a couple of conversations that immigrants and non-English speakers are never invited to a table. I was extremely intrigued of how I was going to get Santiago Diaz, a retired worker of Local 100, to actually talk about redistricting in the way that he does now. He's a plaintiff in an existing still court case with Latino Justice Pearl Def being the attorneys. And we have 4 other members from the Bronx that are still on this open case against the state of New York for passing a really screwed up redistricting plan. And I could not imagine the passion and the conviction that this man spoke about redistricting in our December holiday party. I'm like, no one ever talks about redistricting like in normal terms. And yet how he's been able to now understand, and this is an individual who's 78 years old, who's been living in the South Bronx for a very long time and has been an active member of La Fuente for over 8 years. And for him to talk about an issue like redistricting and with its complexity, the way he did, really made me realize that nothing's impossible. Nothing's impossible. And we're right now in the process of gearing up for the city council and the mayoral races. And when I say gearing up, I mean, as a 501c3, we've pushed the limits within ourselves and within our community to understand that they need to participate civically in every single aspect of life. When we sit down with labor and we talk about participating civically, well, almost a lot of unions have political departments. They have candidates that they endorse. And yet, as a nonprofit organization, we don't endorse any candidates. But we push and we we ignite in people the need for them to engage and participate, from participating at the polls to not being eligible to vote, yet participating and pushing for enfranchisement at the city level, to then talking about the way in which an undocumented individual can ignite his neighbor to understand that their responsibility is to help them and participate in the electoral process. When we have such low turnout rates throughout many of our neighborhoods, and particularly in neighborhoods of communities of color, and in Black and Latino neighborhoods in particular, where voting is one of those special events they do for presidential elections, we found it very much easy to participate in Freeport elections in the village of Freeport on March 19th earlier this year, and tell individuals you need to participate in local races, because local races will get you those lights when Sandy hit and they haven't been repaired, and yet there's major crimes on your street. Local elections will get you a community benefits agreement so that they're not building a mall in the middle of the village of Hempstead without talking about quality housing and opportunities for individuals that will actually pay living and prevailing wage.